Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Scherzer, Director of the JCRC, the Government Affairs, Israel Advocacy, and Community Relations Building Wing of Jewish Federation. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, the latest in our weekly series exploring the issues related to Israel's war against Hamas. Today marks 6 weeks and 4 days since that terrible, horrible Shabbat morning, arguably the darkest day in Jewish history since the Second World War. What became abundantly clear not more than 2 or 3 days after the massacre on October 7th is that there are actually two fronts in this war, one in Gaza, where our IDF soldiers are fighting fiercely to eradicate a terrorist organization whose ultimate goal is the eradication of the Jewish state. And the other is the global war being waged against Israel's very legitimacy and the disturbing ways that that has metastasized into hatred of Jews and Jewish supporters of Israel. Among the appalling, atrocious claims that we have been confronted with over the last several weeks, Israel is committing genocide. Since October 8th, Israel's objective is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from Gaza. Israel is a racist colonial state. One cannot understand October 7th without putting it into context, namely the years of brutal occupation that led Palestinians to this desperate act. And one of the most appalling accusations, of course, that these atrocities never happened, that Israel is in fact making it up. That this is happening, that these falsehoods are being peddled on college campuses, while shocking, is not really surprising because the college campuses, as we know, have been breeding grounds for gross demonization and delegitimization of Israel for the last 20 to 30 years. But the sad truth is, this is not just happening on our campuses. It is happening in our high schools. It's happening in hallways in high schools, sometimes in classrooms. It's happening in middle schools. It's happening in front of boards of education. It's happening in the boardrooms of NGOs, and it's happening in the public square, where people, far too many people, are shamelessly tearing down posters of kidnapped Israeli children. As supporters and champions of Israel, most of us, I think all of us, feel a huge sense of responsibility to be able to stand up and to defend the Jewish state. But many of us, I would say even most of us, need guidance, not only in finding the proper language to shut this down, but also to know when to engage and when to disengage. Who should we be in conversation with? What's the best way to comport ourselves? How should we be making our arguments? What are the words that we need to use when we're trying to make our case to a liberal progressive audience? And should we be spending any time at all responding to Israel's haters on social media? So to help answer these and other questions, we've invited Adam Teitelbaum, Executive Director of the Israel Action Network and Associate Vice President for Public Affairs at the Jewish Federations of North America. Adam and I have known each other and we have worked together closely since his days as Director of the Leadership Development Division at AIPAC. It was there that Adam worked with college student activists and saw firsthand the challenges that our students are facing on campus, dealing with the growing vitriol against Israel and the rise of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, led by students and sometimes by faculty. Adam is going to address what we've been seeing these last 6 weeks, both globally and here in the United States. He'll give us guidance on how to address it. And then, of course, we'll take your questions, which you can start to put in chat. Adam, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is now yours.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Linda, specifically to you. It is just every opportunity that I get to do anything with Linda, the answer is yes. I don't care where I am in the world, what's going on. If the question is about doing something with you, there's no way that I'm saying no to it. You in Greater Metro West and we as a Jewish people are truly better off for Linda's leadership and her innovation and helping make sense of this crazy, complicated world. And also just for the chance to be a part of your conversation today. The community that you are a part of in Greater Metro West is one of the most important in our federation system. I think that just taking a moment of recognition of the power of the federation system was manifested last Tuesday. Whether you were there in person or watching on live stream or just a part of it, what happened on Tuesday when we made history could not have happened without the federation system. The fact that we were able to mobilize nearly 300,000 people to come together to demonstrate our solidarity and our support for Israel, for us to make apparent to the decision makers in the United States Capitol that there is a strong majority opinion that is still supportive of Israel and that demonstrates and prays with our feet, as they say, for continued support for Israel from Congress. That cannot be understated. And I was just, by the way, in a staff meeting where we were doing a little bit of a recap about the march, and it was reiterated. People asked, why do it on a Tuesday and not on a Sunday? We could have had perhaps even more people if we had done it on a Sunday. And the answer is very straightforward, simple, and I think also profound, which is we needed to do it on a Tuesday so that every member of Congress would look out their window and see that crowd. If we did it on a Sunday, who knows where people would have been? There would have been pictures in the newspapers, sure. But we even see there that not every news outlet was willing to cover the story, demonstrating the vastness of the crowd. There were some who said tens of thousands, which I guess if you add up 29 tens of thousands, you get to 290. But to be able to see it directly. And members of Congress were clamoring to be able to be there. They wanted to be on stage. They wanted to be with their constituents, and they wanted to be able to hear and see the vibrancy of that crowd. So I start out by saying there is such an important power of the system that we are a part of. And so much of what we're experiencing today can feel, frankly, overwhelming and daunting because it's like, how are we going to fix the world? And there's that story that I love every single time I think about some of these feelings of somewhat unsurmountable challenge. That I wanted to change the world, but the world was too big. So I wanted to change my country, but the country was too big. I wanted to change my state, but the state was too big. I wanted to change my city, but the city was too big. I wanted to change my neighborhood, but it was too big. I wanted to change my home, but it was too big. And I wanted to change myself. And when I changed myself, I changed my family, which changed my community, which changed my city, which changed my state, which changed the country, which changed the world. And I come back to that time and time and time again, because what you do in Greater Metro West, plus the Northern New Jersey, Southern New Jersey, heart of New Jersey, which just to name New Jersey itself, plus New York, plus Connecticut, plus the Eastern Seaboard, then of course, across the entire North American continent, together, when you are strong, we are greater than the sum total of our parts. I never get that saying correctly, but I know you know what I mean. But we are stronger when we are working on this together. And so I start my remarks here. I'm going to, as Yogi Berra used to say, I'd like to say a few words before I talk. I'd like to say something before I speak. I just want to keep my remarks relatively brief because I know that a lot of what we're going to be handling today is my own attempt at helping give language to your most challenging questions. What are the issues that you feel least confident with? What are the questions that have come across your desk, so to speak, that you feel that you are lacking some context and language? And I want to help provide answers to those questions. And so please take some time maybe I'll just pause for a moment for you to either write it into the chat, write it down on a note card, something so you don't forget. What's a question that you're coming into today's webinar that you decided to take an hour out of your lunch break to be with us today on a webinar? What is on your mind? Then I'm going to take a sip of tea and then we'll get right into it. So as Linda pointed out in the opening, we're living through interesting times. We're living through challenging times. And in Jewish tradition, I guess they say, what's the difference between a Jewish optimist and a Jewish pessimist? Well, the pessimist says, well, it can't get any worse. But the optimist says, oh, yes, it can. And I am unfortunately seeing the trend lines looking towards it getting far worse before it gets better. And right now, just as Linda mentioned, in terms of campus and high school, we are seeing those environments in particular be increasingly aggressive against Israel supporters, not even just Jewish students, but Israel supporters generally. And Jewish students are particularly feeling it. And Hillel just did a recent study where 1 in 3 students say that they are now feeling fearful of wearing outward signs of their Jewish identity, whether it's a Jewish star or a chai necklace, wearing a yarmulke in public, having a mezuzah on their door, whatever the ways that they've traditionally shown their Jewishness. 1 in 3 students are saying that they are feeling increasingly nervous. And 1 in 2 students are saying that they are dissatisfied with the way that the university and university leadership has been addressing this issue. So we are feeling that momentum happen on college campuses. And similarly, we are seeing, as a lot of these questions are coming in, people who do not necessarily have context of the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, let alone Jewish history as it pertains to our connection to the land of Israel, plus a proliferation of social media. There's so much mis and disinformation online that it reminds me also, by the way, of another sort of opening joke, just to put into context of this moment, which were the 2 Jews who were sitting on a park bench in pre-war Germany, and one reading the Jewish newspaper and one reading the German newspaper. And the one reading the Jewish newspaper turns to the other and says, "How could you be reading such terrible news?" And the one reading the German newspaper said, "Well, I used to read the Jewish newspaper, but in that one, everybody hates the Jews. We're so imperiled. The Jews are so weak. In this one, at least we have all the money, we have all the power, we have all the influence. I'd rather live in this world." And that moment of levity in terms of understanding where we are in social media, in terms of the misinformation and disinformation, I will come to some action items we might be able to take when it comes to addressing social media, but to recognize that this is not just about a couple pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel activists who have decided that they want to repost some new information, but that there is an actually concerted effort. There is a disinformation campaign that is part of the Hamas playbook whenever these atrocities escalate. And I can point that out with just the comparison of the conflict that happened between Israel and Hamas in May of 2021 and the conflict that happened with Palestinian Islamic Jihad earlier this year. In May of 2021, when there was the conflagration that happened, which resulted with some escalated rocket attacks, and Israel responded, there was also a concurrent deluge of anti-Semitic vitriol that consumed us on social media. And in fact, many people point to May of 2021 as a turning point in recognizing the way in which anti-Zionism and advocacy against Israel does in fact cross the line into anti-Semitism. And for those of you who were paying attention and remember in earlier this year when there was the flare-up with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, there was not the same amount of vitriol on social media. And in this latest flare-up with Palestine Islamic Jihad, Hamas actually said they intentionally sat out that round of violence. And this is something that has come to light in the aftermath of the October 7th atrocities, where Hamas stated, leadership of Hamas stated that part of their campaign was to spend 2 years trying to fool Israel into thinking that they did not want to be a part of a larger conflict, that they did not want to escalate. And so when they said earlier this year, oh, that's Palestine Islamic Jihad, we're staying out of this one, we're not part of this escalation, that was part of their subterfuge in order to try and get Israel to drop its guard about Hamas. And so that point, that this is not just a representation of legitimate public opinion, but that this is a concerted disinformation campaign, not to say that it alleviates the stress and anxiety, but to say that it is not just because a bunch of 17-year-olds are tweeting more about their hate for Zionism. Okay. So a couple things that I want to point out in terms of areas that I believe are important in terms of messaging that we've learned work. A couple quick pieces of context that I think are also important that I know a lot of people have been asking about. And then I'm going to transition as quickly as possible to your questions so that we can dig into, and there's a lot in the chat. So thank you for putting those in there. So first, I'm just going to share my screen here because there's an organization that we worked with that has done a tremendous amount. Oops, it didn't go from the slide I wanted. They've done a lot of message testing in terms of the latest, in terms of this war, in helping understand ways to make the case that are most effective. Now, one thing that they point out is that Americans tend to have a very short attention span. That works, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, as soon as there will be another issue, another conflict, another topic to capture people's attention, history has demonstrated to us that they will likely take their attention away from this current war. But it also means that the short attention span, they've already forgotten what happened on October 7th. And we're seeing this play out not just because people have forgotten what happened on October 7th, but because there is now a disinformation campaign to say that what happened on October 7th was A, perpetuated by Israel, or B, didn't actually even happen and it wasn't as bad as people are saying that it was. It also is important to note that nuance matters in having these conversations because according to a public opinion poll that Jewish Federation put out into the field, 80% of Jews say that they are following this very closely, and over 70% of the general public say they are following this very closely. And so while people might not actually have the information and the knowledge that they think they do, they believe that they do. And so starting the conversation from a place of nuance and assumption that they know what they're talking about, or at least they're involved in it enough, is an important framework to have. And so here are 5 messages that are important to convey. The first is we cannot let people forget the atrocities of what happened on October 7th and the way in which the Hamas intentionally targeted and brutalized civilian populations. This is important because it is a difference, in fact, the way that Hamas intentionally targeted innocent civilians, although they do claim that every Israeli is complicit in occupation. And so that's something that we could dig into. But whereas Israel is targeting military targets, and so this is a distinction between the two. The second is that the hostages is a critical piece of why fighting has continued. Now, today's headlines indicate that there might be a deal in the very near future to release 50 hostages. The details are still coming out, and I also think it's very important that until it actually happens, we can be optimistic, but we must be cautiously optimistic.
Adam,
And
I'm
in
just going to
terms of
jump in because I'm not sure if you want us to be seeing the map or if you have slides that you're trying to flip to, but all we're seeing right now are these 4 different maps of
the
Palestine.
4 maps, I shared the wrong screen. So I'm going to go to those maps in 1 second, but the message is, I guess it wasn't. I shared
And
the wrong
while you do that, oh, here we go. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Linda. And so what was I saying? Oh, and then in terms of the language around ceasefire, that there was a ceasefire on October 7th. And this is a point that the reason why I actually pulled up the maps, because I'm going to show you something that I think is important in terms of the context here of what ceasefires mean in this conflict. And the last is to use active language that Israel and the Jewish people are working to rescue hostages. This is not just about a passive release of hostages. This is not just about waiting for Hamas, but actually about rescuing hostages. And so here I'm gonna share now these maps, which is just a quick point in terms of context and understanding this conflict, and then answering all of your questions. So the first is, we see oftentimes on social media the narrative that exists around Israel and Israel's land grabs. People will sometimes point to these 4 maps, and they'll say, look at the way that Israel has worked to commit genocide against the Palestinians, against ethnic cleansing, in order to push Palestinians out of their ancestral homeland. And this is proof of the colonization of this land. So they show, starting in 1947, that look how populous the Arab and Palestinian population was, and how sparse the Jewish one was. And then as it goes to today, where based on the little bit of green, the Palestinians have been squeezed into these 2 tiny little pieces of land. Now, there's just enough truth in these maps that it feels hard to dispute, but there is a lot that's missing in terms of understanding this. And so what I want to show in these maps, if I can zoom in just a little bit here, and I know it might be a little bit difficult to see, but here in this version of the partition plan in 1947 shows how the land, which we all know, we've seen this map before, that the division between the Israeli, the Jewish, and the Arab lands was supposed to take place. The Israelis, as we know, accepted and they declared a state, which is an important note here in terms of the declaration of the state. And the Arabs invaded. The War of Independence happened, and then in 1948 there was no end of this conflict. This was an armistice agreement. This was an agreement of effectively a ceasefire in terms of just stopping the fighting. And as a result of this war, you'll see here Gaza becomes part of Egypt, and the West Bank is actually annexed by Jordan. Jordan takes control of the West Bank in 1949. So after 1967, when Israel captures the Sinai Peninsula, including the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Sinai, after the 1978-1979 peace agreement with Egypt, Israel gives back all of the Sinai, and they try to give Egypt control over Gaza again, and Egypt does not want control over Gaza, which means that Israel retains control of the Gaza Strip. And this is where from 79 until 2005, they built settlements. Israel lived in the Gaza Strip, but because of the fact that Egypt didn't want to take it back, and until this time, in all of these iterations of the conflict, in terms of the land exchanges, that there were opportunities for the Palestinians to create and declare a state that they never took. There was no declaration of a state. So there's been this narrative conflict from the beginning, but understanding that fact that there has been language around ethnic cleansing and genocide about Palestinians that is based on less than half truth and truth out of context based on the way that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has evolved since 1947. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in just in the interest of time, because there are a lot of really good questions, Adam.
Perfect
and
timing. I was
I'm gonna
pivoting.
bundle some of them because it's hard for you to do while you're presenting. So I think we know the pictures out of Gaza are extremely compelling. They are hard to watch. They are broadcast not just on international news networks, but obviously 24/7 on our phones. So how do we make the case or explain, when people are saying that too many children, too many Palestinian children, innocent children caught in the crossfire are dying for no justifiable reason? And why doesn't Israel just stop this bombardment? Because that clearly is driving so much of the antagonism towards Israel today.
Yeah, this is a question that is such a gut-wrenching question for so many of us, because the reality is I'm speaking for myself, but I also, for so many people that I know, any innocent death is so abhorrent and so difficult to stomach. There's no question that any loss of life, any innocent loss of life, is just it's like the worst part of any of the issues that we care most about, or frankly, it's why so many of us are involved in Federation work, because our advocacy is about saving lives around the world, including Palestinian lives. And part of what makes that narrative or that question so gut-wrenching is because it suggests, it purports, it alleges that we actually are okay with Palestinian babies dying. We are advocating for and we are justifying the death of Palestinian babies. And so first and foremost, what is important in these moments and with that question is empathy. I mean, is straight up, is authentic, genuine empathy. And we can very much empathize with the unfortunate toll that it has taken on innocent Palestinians. And in fact, the reason why we continue, oftentimes I continue to point to the warnings that the Israeli army give to civilians, the warnings that they give, like creating the nth degree of technological advancement so that they can have a bomb that is strong enough to take out a room in an apartment building, but not strong enough to topple the whole building. That they have ways to shoot a bullet out of a sky with another bullet. The fact that Israel goes to such a length to preserve innocent life, it hurts all the more so when people suggest that all we care about is the bloodbath of killing innocent Palestinians. So first, and it's very challenging, but do not let our emotions get the best of us when somebody alleges that we are supportive of a genocidal regime and we just care about killing innocent Palestinians. We can be authentically empathetic with the loss and impact on innocent life. Stop, period. I mean, like that, it is important to be empathetic. And what's important to recognize, and a chance here in terms of driving the conversation, is the culpability and the responsibility Hamas has on the current situation that we're in. That Israel responded. The reason that this war exists right now is because of the atrocity of October 7th. Had October 7th not happened, October 8th, there would have been no airstrikes. There would have been no land incursion. There would have been no involvement for Israel to go into Gaza the way that they have. And frankly, to be a little bit crass, had October 7th not been as vulgar as it was, the response might have been far more muted. Just go back to 2021, 2018, 2014, which was the largest incursion that we saw in modern history prior to 2023 right now. And Israel would have had far more targeted responses, but because Hamas demonstrated that they have a capacity, they have a will, and they have a desire to actually inflict such unconscionable damage on Israel and harm on Israel, Israel said, this is untenable anymore. And we're going to have to do what is necessary to drive Hamas out of power. And as we've seen over the last 6 weeks, Hamas retained control over the 240 hostages, so there was no release of hostages. They continued to shoot barrages of rockets into Israel, so there was no cessation of Hamas's aggression against Israel. And we know that they continue to use human shields. So the loss of life is heart-wrenching, and it is so challenging to watch. And I'll conclude on this question, which might lead into something else, which is, we also know, though, that the use of those evocative emotional images are intentionally used in order to delegitimize Israel and to discredit Israel's efforts at preserving innocent life. Now, we have to be careful, because we can't just dismiss out of hand that there are innocent people dying, because people would say, you know, whether it's 15,000 or 5, how many dead Palestinians is worthwhile? The answer is, we don't want any dead Palestinians. We don't want anybody to die. And we also cannot trust that what the Gaza Ministry of Health, Hamas, is saying in terms of the impact. We need to take this with a serious grain of salt. But to be crassly dismissive of the human impact is something that is fodder for our detractors.
Thank you. I want to also mention that this is a lot to take in. We are going to be sending out with our follow-up email the link to the Central Mobilization or the Command Mobilization Center, Ground Central for JF&A, which puts out regular updates, talking points, toolkits, things that you can read and review and use in your communities and in your conversations with your neighbors, and sometimes actually with your kids, because a couple of the questions that we're getting here, I think, point to the heartache, the real heartache of parents or families that identify as huge champions and supporters of Israel, lifelong Zionists, and are seeing generational shifts in support or lack of support for Israel. Children who are questioning Israel's role here, accusing Israel of some of the worst crimes, and are actually joining these Jewish Voices for Peace. So one of the questions then, how do we explain to our children that Israel is not an apartheid state?
So the 2 layers of this conversation I want to answer. The first is in terms of the difficult conversation with family members. I will throw out, or I'll put out there, that an important context that I've learned in my intergenerational engagement. So running campus engagement for AIPAC for a decade, working at AEPI before that, liking to consider myself still young at heart, at least, and being, hip and up with everything of where people are, that young people in my peers, for the vast majority, are coming to the conversation from a really good, genuine, and authentic place. And they are asking questions of basically everything in society, because this is sort of there's tons of research out there about the way that millennials and Gen Z experience the world. It's a total non sequitur in terms of the content, but there's a Charles Schwab, a Chuck Schwab commercial, where a father's talking to his son about starting to invest, and the father says, "You should call my guy at this place," and the son says, "Why should I talk to him?" And the dad says, "Well, because I've been working with him for so many years." And the Charles Schwab commercial basically says, like, don't trust your dad just because your dad says to do this. Call Charles Schwab. Now, I put this in sort of as a parallel here, because there's a lot of questioning that my peers and younger generations are doing in terms of the way in which we internalize the systems that exist in the world, leading to the state of the world today. Conversations, and just think about all these words: systemic racism, the economic disparity, the way in which, I mean, looking at Occupy Wall Street in 2010 and how much of that still exists today. So people are coming to the conversation with a truly genuine desire to make the world a better place. And they are grappling with new realities that they've learned. So in terms of the conversation for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have to be appreciative of the fact that there are experiences that through social media, and also, by the way, just through access, young people are seeing and experiencing that we were not exposed to earlier in our lives. I still remember which is different, by the way, than the way Israelis are engaged. Israelis are engaged with the concept of occupation basically from the moment that they are conscious of the news. We, in American Jewish education, do not deal with that, really outside of the idea of there was a conflict, there are terrorists, they want to kill us, and so there are legitimate security concerns that Israel that puts it out there. And so, so I still remember the very first time that I went into the West Bank and I went to Ramallah, and how perspective shifting it was in terms of just how I saw the entire situation. And so the starting point here is people are coming at it from an authentic and genuine place, and they're asking really, really important, profound questions. Now pivoting into how to engage with it is that what are the ways that we can ask curiosity questions? What are the ways that we can be an interested learner about why our family members who come from such proudly Zionist and Jewish homes, why and how are they coming to these new conclusions? And if we're able to engage in a conversation from a learner's mindset, rather than trying to immediately engage in an adversarial tit for tat or an argument, we're going to learn a lot. Doesn't mean that we're going to agree with everything, and it doesn't mean that we're going to finish Thanksgiving dinner at the end of this week with a truly kumbaya moment where we're all reimagining a new Zionism. But this is an important intergenerational moment. The Zionism of 1948 was not the same as the Zionism of 1896, which is not the same Zionism as 2023. And there are people who are talking about this is it's the second war of independence, that this is an opportunity to reinvent Israel moving forward. And so there is a lot of change that's going to happen in the days and weeks and frankly years ahead of us. And so there are opportunities for sure that some of our young people are using language that is not true. It's based on propaganda, and we'll get there. But I do think, especially as we head into Thanksgiving, learning how to ask curiosity questions to engage in meaningful ways is also an important point of what our community can do to better position us in the months ahead.
Yeah, I can't imagine what some of those conversations around the Thanksgiving Day table are going to look like. Look, we have a lot of really good questions here, far too many for us to get to in this short time. I do want to ask you one last one, and I think a lot of the questions are going to be addressed by the talking points that your team has put together, Adam, and that we're going to send out, and that people again can register for and get regularly to update themselves and to really sit and learn, because it takes more than a webinar for people to kind of grasp those talking points. Frankly, it takes many years, but it certainly takes opening up books and reading and studying in order to gain the confidence and the clarity to be able to make Israel's case. But the last question I want to ask you really is a relationship one. I mean, I'm struck by a woman who is asking whether you think our relationships with pro-Palestinian sympathizers will ever be restored. Will things ever be the same? And I guess I'm going to pivot to the question of should we be in conversation with everybody? I mean, is it possible really to persuade a hater or somebody with deeply ingrained antipathy and antagonism towards Israel, who is pained by what they're seeing happen since October 8th. Can we really change their worldview? Or, is that a waste of time? And should we actually be investing our time in speaking to that wide swath of Americans who maybe don't have a strong opinion? How do you think that we really should be spending our time now? Because, I think a lot of us are feeling like we aren't being listened to. And screaming and shouting is certainly not working. So what do you think is the more productive way for us to invest our time?
Well, by the way, I totally am. But like, for the last 6 weeks, I feel like I've been screaming at the top of my lungs, but no sound is coming out. So I can absolutely empathize with that feeling. For what it's worth, I try to be a student of history. And my fun reading books are books like The Pity of It All, the Jewish-German epoch from 1743 to 1938. It's a story about the Jewish-German Enlightenment, and then how it goes from Moses Mendelssohn to the rise of Nazism, and how we know how it ends there. Spoiler alert, not well. But there are already parallels that people are talking about in terms of the rebuilding of Germany after World War II, the rebuilding of a European mindset vis-a-vis Jews post the Holocaust. And if you would have asked, I have family members who will never ever buy a German car because of what happened to my grandfather and his family in the Holocaust. That now one of the greatest party destinations for young Israelis is Berlin. So I think that in terms of the question of can we ever work with some of these the pro-Palestinian empathizers, the answer is now might not be the moment to do it. That in this moment of deep emotional response, with the picture still coming out, with the war still raging, we have no idea how much longer it's going to go, what's going to happen in terms of the release of the hostages, what Israel is doing in terms of its advancement of eliminating Hamas and destroying the Hamas infrastructure. We don't know how much longer that's going to go, and it will continue to get more challenging as time goes on. And so now might not be the time to engage directly with those voices who are strongest against Israel. But to your point about those who are sort of divided, there is still a substantial majority of the United States, especially the older demographics, 35 and older, and those who are in leadership positions, especially currently in Congress. Majority voices still recognize that what Israel is facing in terms of the legitimate threats from Hamas require, unfortunately, such strong reactions and responses. Over time, in the rebuilding of Gaza, in the rebuilding of opportunities, we'll see where those conversations may lead. But for right now, there are a lot of people, our own community, our ability to engage with ourselves directly so that we can maintain the steel in our own spines, our own confidence in this mission is a strategic imperative for Israel's success and eliminating the threats, and also ensuring that the United States remains steadfast in its support for Israel. And so we'll get there. We will absolutely get there. And so right now, there's going to be even more challenging headlines that are going to come out in the not so distant future.
Yeah, extremely important points, Adam, about the critical importance of all of us making those calls to our members of Congress, making sure that we shore up support amongst our elected leaders on the federal, state, and local level, not taking unqualified support for Israel as a sure thing forever. I think you and I, who've been in this business for a very long time, both as champions for Israel and myself as a frontline correspondent covering this story, have never seen the degree of antagonism, of hate, of organization, frankly, among pro-Palestinian forces. And it requires each and every one of us to be figuring out what we can do to make sure that Israel stays strong, safe, secure, and supported by this country and other Western nations in perpetuity. So there's a lot of angst and pain in this chat room, a lot of questions that we didn't get to that we're going to forward to you. Again, I want to assure everybody that we are going to be sending out those talking points, so you will be getting follow-up. And please reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions after that. But for now, I want to say thank you to Adam Teitelbaum for being. Did you want to say something, Adam?
Just two quick sentences.
Yep.
There might be a little bit of a run-on sentence, but very quickly, which is first, I think, and importantly, especially in the intergenerational conversation here, the idea of unconditional support. I think that we live in a world where people are using absolute language to explain situations that are not actually quite as absolute. There are already, for example, the aid to Israel, there are already conditions that exist on the aid to Israel. But what's important is that the question of Israel's legitimacy and their security concerns, those not be questioned. And so engaging in that regard, I think is important as we try to find any semblance of a path forward in our nuance. And just on the point about the anxiety, just to say again, you are not alone in this. I am here as a resource forever. I mean, if anybody, you'll put my information in the chat. I am happy to take phone calls, emails, all of those things. I'm way better on texting than I am on email, maybe because I'm a millennial. But the point about that, let's not take any knowledge or information of the situation for granted. One of the things that we can do is, and this is an important balance, learn the history, engage with the material in meaningful ways, but not get consumed by sensationalist media, the op-eds, the social media posts. Those are that's noise. That's noise. There are lectures, there are YouTube videos, there are books that are written on this. I highly recommend David Makovsky, for example. He has a podcast, Decision Points. So anyway, so learning about the history so that we're not just feeling like we're only barraged by talking points is an important part of this as well.
100%. Thank you. Because we need, this is a wake up call and moment for all of us to learn our own Jewish history, our own narrative of Israeli history, right? We need to be able to be informed ourselves, to be able to speak with confidence and clarity. So thank you, Adam, again, not just for being here today, but for the many years that you have helped me in helping to prepare our high school students, our leaders, to position them for leadership on college campuses, to prepare them for the kinds of arguments and challenges and frankly the hatred that they are experiencing on far too many college campuses in this country. You are truly an incredible asset to the Jewish community. You are always the coolest guy in any room. And I know that we're going to be calling on you in the days ahead. So thank you again for being with us. And I would now like to call on my friend and colleague and lay chair Jody Hurwitz Kaplan to close out our program.
Thank you, Linda, so much. Thank you, Adam, for being here and for sharing your wisdom. And Linda, thank you for all you do every day. I'm Jody Hurwitz Kaplan. I am fortunate to be Linda's lay partner. I chair the Jewish Community Relations Council. It gives me hope to see our community coming together each week in support of Israel and to know the impact that our federation is having on the response to the war we're facing. As the Government Affairs, Israel Advocacy, and Community Relations Building Wing of our federation, our job is to educate the community, to build relationships with our non-Jewish neighbors, and to advocate for Israel with our federal and state elected representatives. We invite you to join us in our work. We need you to join us in our work. This involves calling up members of Congress, making sure that they back the military assistance bill for Israel and the nonprofit security grant funding program that keeps our synagogues and our institutions safe. It also means taking the information you learned today and help make our case, whether it's with elected leaders, friends, neighbors, Jewish or non-Jewish. Please help us communicate in our community. There is also more that we can do to help our Israeli brothers and sisters, and that involves being generous with your giving. We are facing a tsunami of needs, and this is far from over. The UJA annual campaign is the backbone of our community. It is the vehicle that has enabled us to establish an infrastructure to support our partners locally and abroad for a century. The initial $1 million that we sent to our partners in Israel without hesitation was only possible because every year we raise and set funds aside for needs we don't know about yet. We are always prepared to respond because of our generous and committed community of supporters. In addition to our annual campaign, we've established the Emergency Fund for Israel. Amazing that to date, our community has raised more than $25 million for the state of Israel. We're sending 100% of those dollars directly and immediately to Israel. And as of today, thousands of generous donors in our community have already made gifts, and we know there's so much more we need to do. Together, the UJA annual campaign and the Emergency Fund for Israel present an opportunity for us to do something. We need to dig deep, and we need to support both efforts. I want to thank each of you for caring for Israel and our beloved Jewish community right here at home. I know that together we'll do what we need to do in the coming days, what it demands of all of us. Thank you for joining us today. I want to wish you and your families a restful, restorative, and happy Thanksgiving. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.